his mind by Friday and cancel it. Some of these people, what happens is when people find out I'm doing interviews for other shows, they just get bombarded. The Mossad little group online that works together have been harassing me for almost 10 years on the internet now. They just get together and bombard the hosts of these radio shows. You can't have her on, da-da-da, don't have her on. And then interviews get a way of disappearing and getting canceled. I think Daniel Ott over at The Edge, one of the very few that just told him to shut up. He's having me on anyway. I always have a lot of fun with interviews over at theedgeam.com. But anyway, yeah, so this Friday over at the X Zone, I think I told you last week I'd talk about this week was Passover coming up. This year's Passover is the same dates as last year's. It'll start April 3rd, 2008 is the day of Passover itself. Talk a little about tips. And then the Feast of Unleavened Bread will go from Friday, April 4th through Thursday, April 10th. And that's a whole week where you will go through and clean out anything that's leaven in your house, any kind of flour products, yeast products, anything with leaven, you clean it out. And what that does is reminds you once a year about poison and how deadly poison can be. And that includes hypocrisy. It's kind of symbolic for hypocrisy, sin, false teachings. And the Feast of Unleavened Bread symbolizes sanctification and separation from evil. So by going through your kitchen symbolically and throwing out everything that's got leaven in it, it's symbolically separating yourself from evil, reminding yourself to stay away from the things that are evil. I know some people take this further than just going through the house and getting rid of food that has leaven in it. They'll go through and look at videos and CDs and just anything in the house that would be associated with evil. They go through and get rid of. Another part of Passover meal, talk a little about that tonight, is the matzah cracker. Because this is very symbolic of the whole Passover meal, because it's unleavened bread. And during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, it's the matzah that you can't eat. It's not too bad with some peanut butter on it. It's kind of like a cracker, like a non-salted cracker. Most people don't really like the taste of it, but that's the point, it's remembering. This is Feast of Unleavened Bread week. This is, symbolizing separating ourselves from evil, and this is the unleavened bread, and we're also remembering the Exodus from the Jews from Egypt. And, the real mind blower about that whole thing is if people today realize that we didn't just adopt ourselves into Judaism or the Hebrew race. We are the Hebrew race. When I look in the Bible codes, I often see Egypt being in people's codes because that's where their ancestors are from. Most people just don't even have any idea that it was us. Most of us in Britain, Europe, the United States, our ancestors were the slaves in Egypt. Most people are just so clueless about that. Because I think these festivals and our whole history as a race would mean a lot more to people if they knew who they were. If they knew that, hey, this really pertains to my ancestors, my past. Because most of us were from the past, from Egypt. Our ancestors were the Israelites. Some ideas for Passover. I've got, you go to my website at backtoyahweh.com. And I have the dates listed there for Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And I also have some Passover recipes, just some ideas. On Passover, you can eat beef, buffalo, chicken, and fish, such as salmon, flounder, and carp, white fish, tuna, things like stuffed cabbage, eggplant parmesan. There's a gazillion recipes on the internet for chicken and fish and beef and stuff like that. Watch the breading. You don't want any kind of flour in the breading of anything. What I typically do, and I have recipes on my website for roast lemon chicken with shallots and potatoes, or matzo ball soup, eggplant matzo lasagna, or potato latkes is a big tradition. To have potato latkes, which are potato cakes. And there's different recipes there listed for a Passover meal. On April 3rd, what I like to do is, like last year I made a beef roast. And instead of bread, I brought out the matzo crackers. That's as good as normal bread does with our meal, but the whole idea is remembering that, celebrating Passover when the Israelites were leaving Egypt. And so, you can light candles, you can read that passage in Exodus, when Moses and that led the Israelites out of Egypt, or you can read those passages. And then, after Passover meal, that night, typically, is when you go through the house and get rid of anything that has leaven in it. And this is basically no breads for 7 days, nothing with leaven or yeast. Those, what are they called? That Mexican burrito bread stuff. That's okay. Some of those Mexican breads you can eat. The hardest thing is probably just the more you do this, the more practice you get at it, the more cautious you get at it, because you'll realize I can't eat pizza, things you can't eat for the week, things that are breaded that have flour in it. So you just end up eating some simple meats or things for the week, or vegetables dishes, because you don't want anything that's got flour in it. And you'll catch yourself. I know my kids, I don't really enforce it on my little ones, but my teenager, he follows this and understands it. And the little ones tried to follow along last year. They went all week long, and then on the last day, the school had pizza for lunch, and they weren't even thinking, and they had pizza at school. So it's like, oh, we almost made it the whole week, and I was so proud of them. But that's the whole thing, is just remembering and having the Lord and meditating on the Lord for that day. He's not this big legalistic Pharisee demanding that we get every single thing right on these feasts. I mean, he just wants to know that we're trying, what's in our hearts, not in our capabilities and how expertise we are at this. Because I wanted to, most of us have grown up through churchdom all of our lives, and no one's ever, we haven't had anybody to stand up and say, be a real leader. Because I'm finding with the leaders in Messianic temples, they all follow Paul, they worship Paul, they're following Talmudic feast dates. I don't follow the Talmud feast dates. I try to keep it to the Qumran calendar, which is why I celebrate it on April 3rd, and not some of these other dates. You're going to have Messianic temples and church congregations celebrating it on different dates. I follow the Qumran calendar as closely as we can. It's the original legitimate calendar that the Lord followed. And so that's why I follow that one. Just ask Him. It feels right to me every year, just following. And I put a snippet on my website, backttoyahweh.com, about the appointed times and festivals that we're to keep today. It's like Simon Keen's information, and he's from Israel. He's the one that put up my YouTube SherryTalkRadio audios, and he used to transcribe my shows years ago before Liz recently started transcribing them. But he's always done just a lot of work for this ministry, and I love him to death. And he had a great, he's been studying the calendars as best as he can. He's the one digging out the original information from the Qumran calendars. And he said something on his website, I have his link on my website, that really made sense, because a lot of these appointed times and feasts we can't keep because we don't have temples and a priesthood. And some of these feasts and appointed times all centered around the temple and the priesthood. And before Moses died, and he knew Israel was going to be dispersed, he commanded them to keep 2 appointed times, the Sabbath and the Passover, and the 3 pilgrimages, the Festival of Unleavened Bread, the Festival of Weeks, which is first fruits, and the Festival of Gathering, the Ingathering Festival, which is usually around October. The Festival of Weeks is usually around May. So very interesting, I thought. Because you don't have to, sometimes you get to some of these other festivals, like, what am I supposed to do on this one? And I've prayed about it for years, and the Lord would just lead me to meditate on Him.